remember Mum sitting up with me when I had asthma when I was a kid. And how could I not do that for my mum?
Well, thanks so much for being here, Atawhai. This is awesome. Welcome to our kitchen.
Kia ora.
We're here to talk about kaumātua mental health and well-being. But look, before we get into that, I just wanted to share something with you. Is that okay?
Yes, kaumatua.
Yes, so look, previously we talked, this is our family bug.
Right.
This bug has been in the family for about 3 generations, or that I know of. So all of my life. Mum made rewana bread all of my life, so I guess most of her life. As far as I know, she got that bug from her mother-in-law, so my dad's mum, and that's as far as I know.
Yeah.
And for some reason, it's managed to last this long in the family.
Amazing.
And then I've picked it up maybe in the last couple of years. Lost Dad in 2022. Yeah, around August 2022. And so it's kind of, the bug just sort of sat in the fridge because Dad was sort of the last one that was mucking around with Māori bread. So it sat in the fridge for a bit, for about 8 months, I think. And then my sister fished it out and then woke it up again, and then so I got some off her. And so the last couple of years I've been playing around with it. So yeah. And so before we get into our conversation, let's make a bread, eh? We'll at least chuck some together.
Yep.
So what you do is you just chuck about 4 of those.
Excellent.
In terms of measurements, like Mum and Dad didn't really have exact measurements. It was just kind of like...
Neither did Mum.
Yeah. Oh, your mum made it?
Yes, my mum used to make rewana. That was the one thing we would look forward to. You'd come home and walk in the door and you just knew it was rewana today.
Oh, yeah.
And, Mum would cook it in the coal range in an umu.
Wait, what's that? What's the coal range?
The coal range. So, it's a fireplace with an oven and you put firewood in it and coal, and it heated the water and cooked our kai.
Wow. So she'd cook it in there?
Yeah. And an umu, which is a...
umu in my head is like on the ground, like with hot rocks.
Well, we called it an umu. It was basically a camping stove, cast iron, had little legs on it. And Mum would put the bread in there, and when you walked in the door, she'd have the lid half cracked on it, and it'd be wrapped up in a tea towel, and we're like, go away.
Oh, yeah, in one of those Dutch ovens, wasn't it?
Yeah, something like a Dutch oven, but it was clearly a camping one because it had little legs to sit above a fire, Yeah. There you go.
So, I don't really know, but it was something like around sort of 3 or 4 cups.
Yep.
Mum would just kind of say, that'll about that, about that. And then, don't really know how much sugar, but it was about that, you know. Yeah, just give it a bit of a whatever. And then kind of around about, maybe just one cup of the bug. And just
cool.
Yeah, and just dump it in there. And see if you can just kind of swirl it around or whatever. And I'll chuck a little bit of water in there.
Yep, can't wait.
You want the water to be
warm?
Yeah, it was kind of like that hot, like
tepid?
What does tepid mean?
Warm?
Like a bit more than warm, so that it didn't quite burn your fingers.
Yep.
It didn't quite burn your fingers, but you could kind of keep your hands there long enough, and then 3 or 4 seconds, and then go, oh, that's a bit hot.
Yeah.
So whatever that temperature is.
Yep. Yes.
Yeah, and just give it
Cool.
Oh, yeah. How many was Mum cooking for?
5 of us.
About 5 years?
Yep.
Rewana bread sort of came in my family. It was always around, but somewhere around, what I can remember was she started selling it at the flea markets.
Yeah.
Well, like she was, just kind of rolled all that together.
Yep.
Well, I'll do. Yeah, we'll chuck it out and dump it down here, eh?
Yep.
Yeah, that's it. Give it a bit of a knead.
Yep. Nice.
Yeah, you've done this before. And while you're doing that, I'm just going to clean this bowl, and then we'll just chuck it back in here to rest.
Yep.
Very cool. Yeah, and just chuck a bit of flour on the bottom. And nice. Put a bit of a lid on it, and we'll just let it chill for, I don't know, about an hour or whatever. Till it rises.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can't wait.
Chuck it in the oven.
Nice.
Cool. So while we're, I'll just take this over and put it in a warm space.
Yep.
And then while that's rising, we'll have a catch up.
Okay. Sounds good.
Cool. All right, then we'll just go and wash your hands and then we'll go over here.
Thank you.
I was chuffed to hear you talking about rewana bread in your home, Atawhai, just because it was such a big part of my life, I suppose. And so to hear that mum was making bread in a cast iron kind of Dutch umu. Yeah. So the umu is like the Dutch oven, was it? Yeah, nice. For all 5 of you, was it? And any the cousins that would?
Yes, any cousins that would come over, you know, there might be a raru happening in a whanau and they'd come and stay for a couple of weeks and, you know, so, yeah, it was just part of our life, you know. Rewana bread was a regular thing, usually once a week or once every 2 weeks.
Oh, yeah.
But we would come home from school and get that smell as we'd waft in the door. It was just yum.
Yeah, nice. So you'd have it as often as once or twice a week. Oh, yeah. So it's really part of the part of growing up.
Yeah.
No,
and Mum had her own bug.
Yeah.
I wasn't very good at learning how to look after it, though.
Did any of you look after it, or was it?
Well, you know, I would try.
Yeah. Yeah. I found that rewana bug's quite forgiving.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Like, you know, after abusing mine to trying to get it to rise a little bit, eventually we got there. So. Yeah. Oh, nice. So tell me a bit about Mum.
Well, you know, Mum is Ngāti Raukawa, so our marae is Parawera.
Oh, yeah.
At around about the age of 70 to 75, we noticed that she was becoming a lot more and more forgetful, and started doing things like, you know, driving over the concrete bits in the middle of the road instead of going right around it, you know, forgetting to cook kai. And I had a younger adopted sister living at home. And
how many of you were in the house at that time?
So when Mum was, I was always already living away from home when we noticed that Mum was becoming more and more forgetful. But my brother was living close to Mum and he was always around there, and it was through him and the observations of my younger sister that we realised that Mum was maybe had a dementia starting.
Oh, yeah.
And then when she started doing things like driving over the middle of the road and as a whanau, we made the decision for Mum to come and live with me.
Okay.
So
were you close by or were you?
No, I was living in Wairoa and Mum was still in the whanau home in Te Amotu. And so, yeah, we moved Mum down to live with me and I looked after her until she passed away. For about 9 years.
You looked after Mum for 9 years.
Yeah.
And so was she eventually diagnosed? Was she with dementia?
Yeah. Yep, she was. Which prompted me to kind of go to the library to find out what this is about. You know, I knew it was forgetfulness, but I didn't really understand what it was. So you started doing your own. I did some research on, you know, what exactly is dementia, what exactly is Alzheimer's, you know, and how what can I expect, and what can I do to make life good for Mum, basically. Yeah.
I mean, I know this is a really broad question, but you know, what were some of your learnings or your takeaways from? My biggest learning was just to engage with her, you know, even though she might answer a question with something that was nonsensical.
we would just laugh. You know, I would laugh and say, "Oh, what are you talking about, Mum?" You know. Music, you know, Mum loved music, and so all of the old time songs from the 40s and the 50s, you know, they were regularly played in my whare.
Oh yeah, and Mum remembered them.
And Mum remembered those, and you know, I could see that she was progressively losing her short-term memory, and was remembering more and more of the past. So, you know, I would talk to her about what she could remember about the past, so that she could still share those things with me.
And so over the 9 years, was it sort of something that, did it advance as time went along, or did it kind of come and go?
Things like incontinence and stuff like that, you know, progressed as Mum's forgetfulness progressed. So, you know, there would be a lot of wandering in the night because she would forget where the toilet was. So, you know, we would just do things like have night lights, or just leave the lights on through the whare, so that if she did wake up, she could see where she was going, and it wasn't just in the dark and not knowing where the light switches were and all of that. So, yeah, we just tried to accommodate Mum as best we could by making sure that she was safe and could still do what she could possibly do. You know, she would do things like ironing for me because she loved ironing.
Okay, yeah.
But then it got to the point where she'd be sitting by the fireplace and the basket of firewood might be there, and there might be a newspaper or a plastic bag or something. Mum would pull that out and iron it, you know. And a couple of my irons got plastic melted on them. But at that time I was working part-time and for a GP, and the nurse, the nurse manager, she said, "Oh, get you a Teflon cover to put on your iron, and if you want to iron the plastic bag, it's all good." It's not gonna, So, you know.
So a lot of the practical kind of.
Yeah. And instead of saying, "Oh, Mum, don't do that," you know, over and over again, because she'd keep doing it anyway, just found a way so that, oh, well, if she did it, it's no damage.
And was that just sort of something you just evolved over time? Like as you sort of... Yeah. And did you sort of...
Learning about her.
Oh, yeah.
As time went on, you know. Yeah, and what we needed to change to, you know, accommodate those little changes in her.
What was the impact on you, on your family, on...
Because Mum started, because all the girls, all my daughters, I had 4 daughters, they all called me Mum. And so Mum started calling me Mum, and I got a bit frustrated with that, you know, personally. Because, you know, I already had 4 going Mum, Mum, Mum. I didn't want my mum to be going Mum, Mum as well. So that frustrated me. So I said to my daughters, "How about you call me Dawn? Just call me Dawn, or call me out of fire, but call me by my name, and then maybe Mum will start remembering that that's my name." But the funny thing about it was when I wasn't home, she'd go, "Where's Dawn?" You know, she'd always ask where I was and use my name. But, you know, as soon as I got home, "Oh, Mum."
Oh, okay. That wasn't really something that...
I just found it hard to start with. After a while, I'm like, okay, that's all right, Mum. Yeah.
And how did it impact kind of, well, not just you, but everybody else?
My children? Yeah. Well, didn't impact my husband very well, and we split up.
Okay.
But I would rather look after my mum. And that was, no, you know, I'm just like, no, my mum comes first. You know, yeah, we've got a relationship, but at the end of the day, if you can't accommodate her and her needs, then I can't accommodate you. And what was really more frustrating was that his father had passed away and he basically left me the care of his mum. And when I'd be around looking after his mum, there was this one particular time when my girlfriend brought my mum over because he couldn't look after her. And I'm like, just make her a cup of tea or give her a, And that was the end of it for me. I just couldn't be bothered. Because I remember Mum sitting up with me when I had asthma when I was a kid, often. And how could I not do that for my mum? And, and reflecting back, Dave, and the things that I've learned in this role, there's a lot of things I could have done better. I'm just glad that I had Mum at home with us. And the impact on my children was that when their friends come over, they took them in, they would take them in to see Mum. And they'd all sit in there on the bed and, laugh away. And half the time, Mum didn't know what they were talking about, but she was happy and she'd be laughing, And they'd be in the kitchen and they'd have the music up and Mum would be in bed.
Oh, yeah.
And she'd be jiggling away to the music. So, I just hope that I did. Well, I just did the best that I could. But yeah, I don't regret any of it.
Yeah.
None of it whatsoever. Yeah.
So it had a huge impact.
Yeah. And my children still talk about Mum.
Nice.
And, Mum went through times where she would just repeat nursery rhymes and, 1, 2, 3, mother caught a flea, put it in a teapot and made a cup of tea, and I mean, the girls and I, we still laugh about, that now. There was a period of time where Mum couldn't string words together properly, but she could sing them to me. And, she'd say, can I have a cup of tea? In that rhythmic way of speaking. And that was the only way that she could get that sentence out.
Through song. Through music.
Yeah, through that rhythm.
Nice.
Yeah. And so, that's how we communicated from them.
Yeah, so if we walked into your house at that time, you'd be singing.
Yeah. And that would be our way of communicating. But yeah.
And so 9 years. Yeah.
So, and in that time, I split up with my husband and moved back from Wairoa to the home, to our whanau home in Te Amatu, and just carried on looking after Mum over there. And, the marvellous thing about that was when we got back.
So Mum got to come back home?
Yeah, come back to the homestead.
Oh, nice.
And the great thing about that was that Mum remembered where the toilet was, in her own whare. I mean, that lasted for maybe only about a month. Because, next minute the kids were like, Mum, Clee's outside wanting to do a mummy in the garden. I'm like, holy moly, Okay.
Who was in the house at the time you moved back?
Well, my brother was just looking after the house because Mum was down living with me.
Yeah.
So he would go and do the lawns, make sure everything was all good inside and, get firewood in because we still had the coal range. We didn't have electric water heating. Make sure that there was firewood and stuff like that. So, and with Mati Wari, they go through wandering and all sorts of, things like that. And Mum would, I remember the person down the road bringing Mum back and saying, does Sheila belong to you? I'm like, yes, she does. Oh, she was down the road. Now, she was heading down our road, heading out to where she used to live in Parawira. So she said, I'm going home. That's what she told the people who picked her up. I'm going home, and when they brought her back and she says, I was going home, Mum. And that's what I thought. She was going home to Parawira. But yeah, went through a lot of, some days she would be so stubborn and I couldn't, she would make her body so stiff that even an arm around the shoulder to say, come on, Mum,
Oh, yeah.
I couldn't move her. And so there were times where I'd just be standing there talking to her, and thinking, you know, and just talking, nothing talk, but, you know, until I felt her body relax, and then I could bring her back inside.
How did you, as a family, decide that she was going to move back to Wairoa with you? Like, how did you come up
well,
with
we
that?
just all talked together as brother and sisters, and I don't think Mum, and we spoke to Mum about it.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't like
Sort of
we
came
just,
together as a whanau.
Yeah, it wasn't like we just all of a sudden Mum's we're taking you to Wairoa. We did, you know, we explained to her what was happening, and you know, and there'd be moments where she'd be like, "Oh, okay," you know, and then there'd be moments where she didn't really know.
Yeah.
But yeah, she knew she was coming to me, and she was happy.
And
with
that was
that.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, yeah. And how was, what was your experience with the ongoing care with Mum?
Well, I knew nothing about it.
Yeah.
It was really only through the support of the GP that I had in Wairoa.
Okay.
You know, and what the information that she told me, and I got some carer support days and things like that for Mum. And then when we all moved back to Te Awamutu, I was just so in it, I forgot all about that I had, you know, any support like this, that I had this support in place. I had just completely forgotten all about it. And it wasn't until I got really frustrated one day and I rang up the GP that I had in Te Awamutu, and she says, "Oh, why aren't you taking advantage of, you know?" And I'm like, "Oh gosh, I forgot I even had those things." So that's when I met with DSL. They had a kōrero about what support they could help, you know, to provide in the home for Mum. And
So
also
that all came about through the GP?
Yeah. And the carer support days, so that Mum could go to a rest home for like the day or the weekend. Just
For
so
a little
that
bit of respite.
Yeah, just for a bit of respite, so that me and the kids could go and do something or, whatever.
How have things changed in terms of supporting people with mate wareware?
Well, I'm glad that more people are aware of what it is, you know, and, you know, I hear whanau saying, "Oh, they're just being stubborn," or, you know, and it's not, you know. They're not trying to annoy you, your whanau, if they get this, this disease. But I'm really happy that more of our whanau are getting an understanding of what it actually is. You know, and they talk about things you could do to help improve your brain. But, you know, I did a lot of research, and I even like Iris Murdoch, who's a well-known writer, she got mate wareware. And I watched a documentary about how her husband dealt with, you know, because I was trying to flood my brain with as much information
as you could,
and what people's experiences were. So, you know, whether you try and train your brain to be better, I'm not sure whether it actually makes a difference when people who are quite scholarly can also, you know, get this disease. You know, it's sad.
Either back then or now, outside of the GP supports, what other supports are kind of out there?
Well, you know, we've got Alzheimer's New Zealand, we've got Dementia New Zealand. I mean, they can give you a little bit of information. They can maybe put you to, you know, maybe share with you those specific services, like especially for whanau who have only just heard the diagnosis. Well, where do we go from here?
Where do whanau go from
so
there?
Those specific organisations can give you those steps to say, yep, go back to your GP, get that referral to DSL to see what home supports.
And what's DSL?
So DSL is Disability Support Link, and they do assessments with whanau to see what need there is. With whanau who've got mate wareware living on their own, they can be assessed to get support with home help, with showering, with getting the washing done, things like that. The support that I got for Mum was just for showering for Mum. and having some respite care. So that, you know, we could go away for the weekends, or mum could go while we went to do whatever. Yeah. Yeah. So, and your GP should be able to give you all of that information.
Okay. How important do you think was mum's connection, say, to her marae, and to iwi?
Yeah, it was very important. And my brother was the one, actually. He would always pick mum up and take her out to the pokai. Or, I mean, you know, there's a photo of mum in the Waikato Times with the Queen. Oh, not the new one.
Oh, yeah, nice.
And, you know, I know she had a bit of mati wari then. But she wanted to go, you know, and she liked being in those spaces.
What role do you think staying connected to the marae and to the iwi had on her kind of...
I think it had a
ongoing life satisfaction.
I think it had a positive role. You know, it just disappointed me that I didn't kōrero Māori, because I'm sure if I was able to kōrero Māori with mum, it would have probably helped her with her memory and with, you know, information that she knew. Because even though...
so for mum, te reo was her first language?
Yes, te reo was mum's first language. And, you know, sadly, it wasn't encouraged for us to learn te reo, because Dad was of the mind that, well, there's no point in you learning it because it's a Pākehā world now. You need to learn to be able to speak English.
Did Dad speak te reo too?
He understood it.
Yeah.
He didn't speak te reo. But
your sense is that the role that the marae and the iwi had... Yeah,
because we were, mum, you know, that was mum, you know, she was always taking me out to the marae. I'd be like, oh, you take the rest of them. But anyway, but, you know, mum's thing was the marae, always going out there, you know, the ragman would come, and they had a little rōpū of kuia that used to support the marae, and they'd hold different events, and
what would you say her role was?
Well, she wasn't like kai karanga or anything like that on the marae, but she was a big supporter of it. And I think that comes from the fact that her dad had donated the land for the marae. So she felt a really strong connection to us and us going there. Yeah.
Well, how important then do you think that could have been in, say, like her recovery, if that's the right word, or in her...
I think it would have been very important. I think it would have made her feel at home, you know, in herself. Because, I mean, I couldn't even imagine what it might be like to... I mean, it was bad enough when I got COVID and I couldn't put things together in my brain, you know. I mean, I had like brain fog, and I thought, if that's what dementia's like...
Do you have any thoughts around what the marae or the iwi or the haku could do for our whānau that are suffering with dementia?
Well, you know, just for our kuia and kaumātua, it would be really wonderful if maybe even if our iwi ran some programs, you know, at the marae, which would help with balance, which can help strengthen their body. If they could maybe support marae to have like a shower seat or a wheelchair available for any kuia or kaumātua that come to the marae that might need that. The other thing that would be could be helpful out at the marae is for them to have maybe even a walker, you know, so that whānau who might be travelling to, you know, that there's something there that they can use, but especially a shower still, because, you know, honestly, for some of our kuia and kaumātua to be able to stand in a shower. I mean, I had to teach mum about showering because we grew up using a bath. We didn't grow up with a shower. And, you know, to start off with mum, it was, the shower was sore on her body. You know, she felt it on her skin because wasn't something that she was used to. So I got a softer shower head, you know, just to make it more comfortable for mum. The other thing that the iwi could look at is that, you know, there's a lot of our marae that could utilise having maybe transport in that area, you know, that the marae looked after, so that the whanau that live rurally, they've got a way to get into appointments, to the hospital, because, you know, for whanau that live in communities like Hamilton and Te Amatū and that, they do have those kind of shuttles, health shuttles within that environment, but they don't go out into our rural areas. And, you know, and I think of some of my whānau who live rurally out at Parawera. If they don't have a vehicle, they'll never be able to get into the GP unless they pay for a taxi. And with the prices of everything now, who can afford that? So, you know, I think transport is something that our iwi could help our marae, you know, to have, so that it can be utilised by kuia, kaumātua, or just whānau in that area where that marae is, to transport them into, especially our medical appointments.
Nice. Yeah. I see. I'm kind of I'm not really involved, but I just kind of see out in Kāwhia and out at Raglan, they run those marae clinics out there. Yeah, and I think if more of our marae were able to run, you know, host health days. Just kind of host health days every fortnight.
Yeah, or even once a month.
Yeah.
You know, because, you know, kuia and kaumātua, they don't always want to be getting out and about.
Sure.
But even if it was once a month clinic that they knew that they could go to get their diabetes checked, their whatever's checked, you know, heart, blood pressure, all of those sort of things, I think it would make a big difference. And to have that kōrero, you know, because I think a lot of the problem for our whānau is isolation, and especially for our kuia and kaumātua, you know, they want company. I looked after a kaumātua in my service, and, you know, he just wanted somebody to sit down and have a kai with him.
I was working in Avalon Medical for a couple of years, and one of the challenges that they had here was sort of the kaumātuas coming in and paying for appointments just to sit with the doctor. But there wasn't really anything wrong. It was just more of someone just to chat to, you know. And so we'd sort of pick up a lot of those whānau that were just, for whatever reason, disconnected from their families and isolated. And
you know, sadly, there seems to be more and more of that, where whānau are disconnected from their, you know, and for whatever reason, you know, they're lonely.
So iwi could perhaps step in to sort of help reconnect.
Yeah, help whānau reconnect. I mean, I would love to see some of our marae having papakainga out there for kaumātua and kuia, you know, where they're actually on the marae. Any hui or tangi, well, they're a part of it, you know. I just think that would be marvellous for our kuia and kaumātua. The other thing I'd like to see is more of our kaumātua interacting with our, you know, kohanga reos, because look at that bunch of knowledge there that they could be sharing with our young tamariki. You know, and I know some of our kuia and kaumātua, they're hoha with the tamariki, they don't want to have, you know, never mind that, I'm over that. And I understand that, but there's plenty who are willing to share and, you know, pass on their knowledge and expertise. I mean, it's the same with my mokos, you know, I take them out into the garden to say, well, this is a plant that you can pick, you know, for your mamai, or you can eat this plant, you know, so just things like that. I think that's invaluable knowledge to share with our tamariki.
Yeah. And so things like connecting, say, with your doctor to inform yourself of the services that are out there, reconnecting back with our marae, but you also mentioned some cool things in terms of what marae can do to
help support our kaumātua.
Give better access to, help support our kaumātua. Yeah, nice. If you could kind of package a wellbeing service for kaumātuas, like what would you... It
would be marae based.
Oh, would it?
Yeah.
Okay then. Is there anything that you...
Especially for our, you know, for our Māori kuia and kaumātua, you know, I just think the environment of a marae is more conducive. I mean, you know, why do you think they build retirement villages? You know, it's because elderly people want company, but they want to be together with elderly people. They don't necessarily want to be living in the whaea with, you know, the young ones still having a party and all of those things carrying on. But yeah, I'd love to see a marae-based service where our kuia and kaumātua have got a whaea that they can go to, does have those medical services coming out there and providing them that support, have got transport to take them to the hospital or to the doctor's appointment. I mean, that would be awesome, you know. I mean, and if they had a kōhanga running out there, or, I mean, it doesn't even have to be a marae. It can be just an environment where it's as a collective. But that's only me personally, not everybody likes that.
Yeah, sure. Just thinking about the isolation that can occur. Even if people didn't want to socialise or whanau.
Even people who are not kaumātua but are living on their own, they still feel isolated. And the only way that they can have interaction is by, you know, going out, either driving somewhere, catching a bus, or
Like, is there anything else, Atawhai, that you're sort of seeing in your role on the ground, looking after kaumātuas, that...
I think communication and services. Communication is probably the biggest problem in any area. My daughter had a recent experience with work and income, and she was told by 3 different people to do 3 different things. She did the first and the second thing, and by that time she was so stressed out because she'd taken that first thing and, oh no, you have to do this. Then she took that, oh no, we need you to do this now. And she was just so stressed she didn't even bother to do the third one. And then the next day they'd ring her up and tell her it's been approved. And she kind of lost it and said, you put me through all the stress. I didn't even get to the third part and yet you're telling me it's approved? What, you know, why were you all telling me such different things?
Gotcha.
So imagine a kaumātua being told, oh, go and do this, they do that, oh, go and do this, or they do that, or do that, you know. I'd be like...
So sort of some of those, just navigating the whole...
Yeah, the communication needs to be really clear. You know, this, yes, you do this step, then this step, then this step, not just do this step and then find out later, oh, I've got to do this, this, and this. You know, let's have the whole pathway clear, shown, so that they know exactly where they're going, exactly what results they're going to get. And the other thing is, I think our kaumātua get hoha talking to, oh, you. I just want to talk to one person. I told you my story. I don't want to tell you, and you. And that's where I think our kuia and kaumātua get just frustrated. They get annoyed. They get peed off. They're like, you know, well, bugger it. And then they don't do anything for themselves.
And perhaps that's where they can get themselves a bit isolated.
Yeah.
Just hoha.
And they're hoha. Yeah. And then they get whakamā to want to share anything with anybody. Because they're like, oh, well, I've said this before. Where did that get me? Yeah, nowhere. So I do think the communication is not the greatest.
And what would be your message, kind of finally, for perhaps for whanau or for listeners out there, in terms of what it is they can do practically to support their loved ones with dementia? Just get yourselves informed. You know, find out exactly what your kuia and kaumātua's ailment is. You know, whether it's mate ware or they've got cancer or whatever. You know, and be a part of that process that your kuia or kaumātua is going through. You know, don't leave it to them on their own. You know, and as we're getting older, I mean, you know, my hearing gets a little bit iffy sometimes, so I don't always hear things clearly. And when you've got 2 people going in to hear about what needs to be done, then you're going to have a better understanding. But I just encourage our whanau to inform yourselves. The information is out there, whether you go to the library, whether you Google it, whether you go on YouTube. There is a wealth of information. I have learnt more. Even though Mum's passed, I've learnt more.
but it helps me to help others, you know.
Nice.
And to tell my daughters, well, you might be dealing with me in the future, so hey. You got to know
informed,
this.
yeah,
You got to know this.
Nice. Oh, look, thanks so much for sharing the couch with me.
You're welcome.
Atawhai, it's been awesome, and thanks for letting me share a little bit of our rewana story together.
Yeah.
And it's lovely to hear that that's been part of your life too. It always gives me a little bit of a lift.
Yeah.
And to hear Mum's journey and to hear your journey of supporting her has been really valuable. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
And so,
Ka pai.
yeah, kia ora.
Kia ora.